We got one more guest, one more segment here for this Tuesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Ralph Michaels over at wagertalk.com. Ralph, big day for you, man, the start of the college basketball season.
Better than my birthday, better than Christmas morning, the opening day of college basketball. Nothing more exciting.
Well, and it's a very exciting day over at Wager Talk as well. I know you wanted to talk about this, and certainly respect your college basketball work. You're very, very good at what you do, sharing free information, but also premium picks available over there at the website, and a great deal here on the opening day of college hoops.
It is. Thank you, Adam. Wager Talk, we always have a $2 handicapper on Tuesday. And I happen to be the $2 handicapper. And what we decided to do, instead of just putting out one play for $2, you're going to get my entire card for Tuesday. And I have 5 plays, Adam. Those are going to be posted at 1 o'clock Eastern. So if you're listening right before, they'll be up shortly. You can get them and they'll get emailed to you. But you're getting my entire card. Again, I do have a lot of volume. I've averaged 350 plays the last couple years. And it's not as if though I get crazy. It's just the way that value works out. We've talked about it in the past. In the past, we used to use KenPom to beat Vegas. Well, now Vegas uses KenPom. If you look at KenPom's projections, they're within 1.5 of the line. So now we're handicapping against KenPom. And, Vegas has no edge over me. They've put less work into putting these numbers out. And I feel we certainly have an advantage early in the year.
Again, trying to pick off those soft numbers. You got some sides. You got a total on the card as well. 40 cents a piece. I mean, how can you beat that here on the start of the college basketball season? So best of luck for the season overall, Ralph. Best of luck for today's card as well. I know the amount of work that you put into this. I know the amount of work that all of our guests put into their craft here on Bang the Book Radio. So hoping for the best for you this season, man.
Thank you. And even if you don't spend the $2, go to Wager Talk, go to my homepage, go to the Ralph Michaels page, and download the college basketball guide. It's 2 full pages per conference. You're going to know what their rank was at the end of last year, their points per game diff at the end of last year, how many returning starters this year, the percentage of minutes returning, their 247 rank, the Bartorvik rank on overall offense and defense, the KenPom rank, the blue ribbon ranks, the conference ranks, all those numbers are in there to help you become a better, and just at a glance, at least have a feel of where these teams are when they start this 2019-2020 college basketball season.
And I love the Torvik mention, and this guy, it's not like he pays for advertising or anything on the show, but I love his work over at BartTorvik.com. Everybody knows about KenPom. Fewer people know about Torvik, and Torvik's site has some really, really good features as well. You can look at sort of game charts and game grades over, X number of games. It's a really, really good resource. It's also free, so you can't really beat that. But Torvik does a great job. We'll mention him a lot here as we go forward. And in fact, so much excitement about the college basketball season. I'm going to flip the script that I sent over to you here, and we'll actually start with college basketball, also in part so that people can get this a little bit quicker here, because a lot of times we will talk about games that are the day of the show or maybe the next day after the show. So again, if you listen to Bang the Book Radio, subscribe to notifications over at bangthebook.com, or just make sure that it automatically downloads for you so that you get these. You can listen to them. You can get involved in these plays. Again, obviously, I know everyone's time is valuable, but we do everything we can here to get this out as quickly as possible and get some of the day of information out there for college basketball. But Rolf, as we start with college basketball here, just in general, before the season begins, before we get to the talking points that I sent over, anything else you want to mention for listeners out there as they get prepared for tonight and beyond?
This may seem like basics, but take a look at teams that return 4 or 5 starters with a point guard, and they're facing a team with 0 or 1 returning starters without a point guard. And you think, oh, well, everybody does that. They don't. There's 353 teams. People don't even know the number of returning starters. What I do when I'm looking at that, I also add in the transfers, because just like we've seen the impact of college football transfers with quarterbacks at Oklahoma and Ohio State, and, it didn't work out so well at Washington. But, we've seen so many impact quarterback transfers. The same thing has happened with college basketball, where traditionally a player stayed at a program, played 4 years. Well, now you're a grad transfer. Guess what? Boom. I'm going to Virginia Tech over to Texas Tech, and I'm going to play for Beard. And I think I got a better shot to go to a Sweet 16 and move on. So Again, take a look at what the transfers are. If you just Google, there's a lot of good sites that had good stories on transfers. I mean, the basics, ESPN and CBS Sports and a bunch of others. And, and then look at situations. We'll see how moving back the 3-point line pans out. In my college basketball guide, Adam, I put in not only what the 3-point percentage was, but how many 3-point shot each team took. So we don't know what the ramifications are going to be right now. We can only guess. We only have a small window that we looked at last year in the NIT tournament. But after a few weeks and we start looking at the numbers, you can make your adjustments from those teams that shot the most or the teams that shot the fewest on how much you need to adjust what you have or what your preseason thoughts were on a team.
Well, one of the things that I know you like to do, you like to look at a lot of situational handicapping. You also do a lot of technical handicapping in college basketball. And I wrote up a college basketball situational spots piece over at BangTheBook.com. It's on the front page here today. A few things kind of caught my eye a little bit. We'll talk about some of those. Then we'll get into some specific games here for Tuesday. Finish up, of course, with college football. But something I found very, very strange. The ACC is starting with conference play. A lot of teams play non-conference. They play paycheck games. They play those opening season tournaments. They'll play a lot of regional games. We'll talk little brother, big brother here in a minute. But the ACC is starting with conference play. Louisville, Miami tonight, Virginia Tech and Clemson. You've also got a couple more tomorrow. You've got it's insane to me that you would start with a conference game.
I completely agree, and I tweeted that out, that I am not a fan of starting. Again, college basketball is so much different than football. You have 0 returning starters like some teams do. That's like saying, well, you lost 22 football starters. It doesn't happen in football. Even the team with the fewest returning starters returns half their starters. So in college basketball, to start with that emphasis, I'm not a fan. These teams have had one scrimmage against a Division II team, and that's basically it. So, the ACC went to 20 conference games, and they decided that, like the Big Ten, they didn't want to mess around with any conference games late in December once the kids were out of school. So from December 15th through the first week in January, boom, no conference games. And then you got into Thanksgiving. They didn't want to have any conference games Thanksgiving, and they didn't want to compete against those conference championships that first week of December. So they had to fit them in early, and a handful today, a handful tomorrow. Again, I'm not a fan. We'll see how much it really pans out that the teams with more returning starters can jump out to an edge with an early win.
And there are 3 of them here tonight. Like I said, Louisville, Miami, Virginia Tech, Clemson. The other one, Georgia Tech and NC State. I believe there are 3 more tomorrow as well. And I mean, what do you do when you go from being, you're Louisville, you play on the road at Miami in your conference opener, and then you go and host Youngstown State? Or even for Miami, you host Louisville, then you host Florida Atlantic. So then you wind up playing, it's not as much of a little brother, big brother type of game in the state of Florida. But then you play this, lower tier team in your home state that wants to come at you, but you just played a conference game that you were completely jacked up for. This could create some very interesting game 2 and maybe even game 3 spots for the ACC.
Oh, no question. You mentioned the games today. Well, guess what? Everyone else in the conference plays tomorrow. So, everyone in the ACC plays either today or tomorrow against a conference opponent. So I did not use any ACC games today because, there's a different mentality when you're handicapping college in the beginning of November and teams are feeling each other out than knowing how much focus was put on this one game. Because there's a lot of coaches that don't worry about one game and don't game plan as much as they would when they get into the season. But you have familiarity. You play this team twice a year. Well, most teams twice a year. It's just a situation that I'm going to do a wait and see attitude. So we'll see what happens.
All right, so something I wanted to talk about here, and we get so many of these spots early in the college basketball season, those little brother versus big brother types of games. You got a couple of them tonight here. Drexel and Temple, one in Philadelphia that people won't really think a whole lot about. Northeastern and BU. Northeastern's been the better team, 11-5 in this rivalry, dating back to 2006. Northeastern then plays Harvard later on in the week. You've got crosstown rivalry games. You got a bunch of stuff going on in the non-conference. So looking maybe specifically at Drexel and Temple or something like that, how do you handicap those little brother versus big brother types of games?
Well, let's go through and basically how I would handicap this game. You look at Drexel last year and they finished 251 or 249, depending on the RPI or the Ken Palm or some different numbers you're looking at, against a Temple team that finished 69 or 76th in the country. Drexel has 2 returning starters and they return 62% of their minutes. Temple has 3 returning starters and returns 72% of the minutes. The recruiting was pretty equal. Temple had the number 98 class and Drexel had the 107 class. But then you look a little deeper and you say, well, Drexel only had 2 returning starters, but they returned 2 players that were starter worthy that were injured last year. Zach Walt was a starter. He played the first 7 games, missed the rest of the year. And then Kirk Lee was the second leading scorer in 2017. He only played 6 of the 32 games last year, and now those 2 are back. So really that 2 turns into almost 3.5 or 4. And then you add in Temple without Chaney. That's like saying, Florida State without Bowden. So, you're missing that situation. Temple's a team that has such a unique matchup. You have a 6'8" guard in Quentin Ross, who's their best player. But again, on Drexel's side, you have a point guard who was the freshman of the year. He averaged 11 assists, in Cam Winter. And to me, when I look at the game and I look up the matchups and I look at where those projections are, because of the underdog having that familiarity and this being, like you said, that little brother situation, I actually lean with the dog in this game.
Yeah, Aaron McKee takes over for Fran Dunphy here for Temple. And, that's the interesting thing, too, is that, I think a lot of people try to drum up this little brother versus big brother narrative, and I'm trying to do it here, but for a purpose on the show, that a lot of times people will gravitate towards the dog and say, well, some of these guys may have been slighted in recruiting, or how often are they going to get a shot like this? That's great. On the other hand, it's entirely possible that the other team is just a whole hell of a lot better. In this case, maybe that's not the situation, but there will be a lot of those over the course of the next, 4 or 5 weeks where one team is just much better than the other team, and it doesn't matter if it's little brother versus big brother. Big brother is just too big and too strong.
There's a difference as well. When we're talking little brother and big brother, Temple may be a big brother, but they're not a traditional big brother where the wins don't matter. I'm going to back and let's talk, we're going to talk about Kentucky later. Well, if Kentucky loses this game, it doesn't mean anything to them. They're trying to set a lineup that's going to win for them in March. Them losing one game just to see how kids play out, no problem. Temple losing a game like this can matter down the stretch. So there's 2 different levels there when we're looking at Big Brother. One is the traditional top 20 teams that win one doesn't matter. Others are the next step down. Let's call them the mid-majors, where a win does matter and getting upset could change your postseason projections down the road.
Yeah, that's an excellent point too. And there are some of these games here this week that kind of are selection committee types of games, and those are always things you want to take a look at. Auburn's got an interesting neutral site game against Davidson, for example. Washington and Baylor play in Anchorage, Alaska on Friday. Arizona State and Colorado play in Shanghai, China on Friday. So there are some really interesting spots. You do want to try and keep up on as many of those as you possibly can. Because, again, there are so many interesting non-conference games. How about Vermont and Bucknell on Sunday? Talk about a low major powerhouse game there. So, again, some interesting spots you definitely want to factor into the equation here, including some that have bigger name teams, like this one that you and I are going to talk about here. St. Mary's and Wisconsin playing in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So I guess they thought, well, we'll kind of find somewhere in the middle and play there. But and that kind of, to me, maybe I'm just kind of a purist and a traditionalist, kind of cheapens the game that it's going to be in front of a crowd that doesn't really care about either team.
Yeah, I agree. It's too bad the game's there because that would be a well-viewed game. Wisconsin's going to draw. We know St. Mary's backing, and it's a game because of the because of the neutral setting, I'm not on either side. My power ratings clearly have St. Mary's as the better team. They returned 9 of their top 10 scores. They got a 6th-year eligibility that they weren't expecting. Their Cincinnati transfer, Johnson, became eligible this week. And I just think there's such a well-rounded team that has always been the underdog. But this Wisconsin team does have a chip on their shoulder. People think they're going to be down so much without Happ being there. They still return 3 starters. They're still Wisconsin. They still play Wisconsin defense. They know they're the underdog in this game. They know St. Mary's is ranked and they're not ranked. So, it's a dangerous setting when you have a team that can play defense like Wisconsin does, and they truly have a chip on their shoulder to start the season as an underdog.
Well, it's something that's always interesting about games like this, too. You come out of the chute firing. St. Mary's winds up playing Wisconsin here in this neutral site game. Then this weekend, they host Winthrop. And Winthrop, by the way, has a very, very strange travel schedule coming up here for this week. We'll talk about that as we go throughout the offseason as well, where some of these teams are just all over the place. Mississippi Valley State doesn't play a home game until the first week of January, just as one example. But you kind of have those games, too, where you step up and really play against somebody good. We'll use Wisconsin as the example here. They play St. Mary's, then they play Eastern Illinois and McNeese State. And you kind of worry about going from playing this high-level game to playing this game where you're favored by, 25 or 30 points.
Agreed. And, those teams, they know that for years, there's some teams that have played very difficult non-conference schedules. Why? Because the only way you're making the tournament is if you win your conference and then you're the number 1 seed and then you win your conference tournament. And, teams have different ways to go through the season. And some teams, let's face it, are just playing money games. They need the money. They're getting paid to visit these sites. They are doing it because they have to for the financial need of the athletic program. So it's important to know where a team fits in that mold as well, is if it's a money game where they truly believe they can win this team and it's going to help them moving forward.
Anything else you want to talk about here in terms of the non-conference before we move on to tonight's 2 marquee games?
No, again, just don't be afraid to make adjustments. Again, we see the uniqueness in the ACC schedule. And again, there's enough games. College basketball season's long enough. There's enough value. And, my thought is don't guess. If you have a question and you think, I think this will happen, let's wait and see if it happens. There's plenty of time to catch up. It's not football where if you miss a scheduling opportunity, you may not have that same scheduling opportunity the rest of the year because you're going into conference play and you only had that once. In basketball, it's likely that you're going to be able to find that value in other places. So wait and do it. I do want to talk one unique team. We've talked about teams that have 5 starters or no returning starters. I don't know if I've ever heard of this. Eastern Illinois has no freshmen and no sophomores on their team. They return all 5 starters. Their 3 backups were all upperclassmen. They signed 4 JUCOs, and they have a grad transfer from Bethune-Cookman. They're playing Texas Tech tonight. I think they can hang with them. But again, an interesting situation. You want to talk about an experienced team, it has to be as experienced as we've had at least in the last decade.
Wow, that is absolutely crazy. And also, too, we just mentioned Eastern Illinois. They play Wisconsin here coming up off that St. Mary's game. So that could be an interesting spot to take a look at Eastern Illinois. I guess one other thing I will ask you here before we get into the marquee games, where the marquee games have been lined pretty accurately. I mean, when you've got 4 blue blood teams, those lines aren't going to move a ton. Early in the college basketball season, a lot of these lines will move a ton. In particular, the totals will move substantially, upwards of 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 points in some situations. How do you interpret that? I mean, because a lot of people aren't going to get the best number here at this time of the year. It's just not going to happen. So what would your advice be for listeners that, maybe get discouraged at how much a line has moved or feel like I just want to be on the sharp side in this game?
Well, I tweeted out these 2 lines before anyone opened them up. And my 2 lines had Duke, Kansas pick, and it had Michigan State 4.5. And the Duke game actually opened up Duke -4. Kansas is now a 2-point favorite. That was a 6-point line move, and it moved 4 points to the way I thought it would go. And the Michigan State game, opened up 1, and now it's 3, and I think it's 4.5. So I still think there's value with Michigan State. So, we have seen some live movement in that. But again, we're talking 1 or 2 casinos opened these up a few days ago, and a couple bets could have changed them because, if Kansas and Duke are playing in March Madness, they're getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars in wagers every half hour. Now they're probably just getting a few bets, and they're moving a number being very afraid that their number was wrong. So they're changing it with much less money than it would take. So, take that with a grain of salt as well with those line moves. But, to me, I think the best matchup maybe in the country we're going to watch tonight is, Winston against Hagens, the point guards for Michigan State and Kentucky. What I think is that Michigan State's number 1, but with Langford there, they're not the best team right now. They're just there on reputation. They're there because Blue Ribbon picked them number 1. And much like we talked about my former boss, Phil Steele, when Phil Steele's magazine comes out, media reads that, and then when they vote for the AP, they tend to vote for what they just read. Well, in college hoops, I guarantee you, every person who votes for the AP Top 25 bought Blue Ribbon. Well, Michigan State's 1, Kentucky's 2. So there's absolutely no surprise Michigan State and Kentucky are 1 and 2 in the AP poll. But, while I think Michigan and, like I said, I made Michigan State 4.5. If Kentucky wants to slow this pace and get it down, they have such a big size advantage. Their power forward and their center, Montgomery and Richards, are 6'10" and 6'11". Henry and Tillman for Michigan State, 6'6" and 6'8". So if Kentucky wants to slow the game, pound it down, I think they can have an edge. But I just think Michigan State has too much depth and has too much scoring. Looking at the Kansas-Duke game, you look at Duke, and this isn't the same Duke team as last year. Last year Duke had no returning starters, and of course we know what they brought in, one of the best classes ever, and we saw what happened right from the stretch. Those freshmen were elite to go. And if you look at Duke this year, they only return 1 starter, and Kansas returns 3 starters. But in my college basketball guide, I talk about percentage of returning minutes. Kansas has 3 starters. They returned 55% of the minutes played. Duke has 1 starter, and they returned 45% of their minutes. So it's not a 3-to-1 difference if you're looking at starters. You have to look in deeper. Duke has Jack White and Javan. Excuse me, yeah. And Trey Jones, a point guard, but Jack White and who's their other captain? Devy went brain dead. But they returned 2 centers. They returned 2 seniors that were captains last year and are captains this year to go with Trey Jones, a point guard. So it's a very deep 1 returning starter team. So it's a game. Again, I would lean right now. The game's gone through my number. It's a basket away from pick. I don't have an opinion in that game. I would tend to think Michigan State, Kentucky under, Duke, Kansas over. But again, I'm going to watch like the rest of the world. No plays on either of those 2 big games. But they clearly are the elite teams in college basketball.
Delorier is the player you were looking for, right?
Thank you very much. Yeah, he was a captain last year. So, you may not have been a starter, but White and Delorier were both captains last year, along with Jones. So you have all 3 captains back. That's an important tool when you're going into the season to have that type of leadership on the court, despite losing who they lost to the NBA.
What do you think about those 4 teams long term? I mean, obviously tonight in a vacuum, people are going to overreact to it, and futures odds are going to change and this and that. But what do you think long term about these 4 teams? I mean, does any of the 4 stand out to you?
I think Michigan State is the best team. If they get Langford back healthy, and remember, Langford missed 26 games last year, so it's not as if though he played, but we know what he's capable of doing. Memphis is the team everyone's talking about with the recruiting class and the number one player. I think they're gonna lose some games. People are talking about them making a run through the American Conference. A team that I look at is Seton Hall. If I had to pick a long shot right now and I wanted to bet someone, you're getting Seton Hall, a team that knows how to play defense, a team that's very veteran. They're the team that I made my one long shot bet on to win the entire tournament.
Yeah, well, you got a great player in Miles Powell, so definitely makes a lot of sense there with that. And hey, we'll see what happens here. We'll talk futures as we go throughout the season, try to find different buy points, build a portfolio for the NCAA tournament here once we get to the month of March. But again, head on over to wagertalk.com and check out Rolf's $2 handicapping deal there. Again, 5 plays here for the opening night of the college basketball season. $2 for all 5 of them, 40 cents a piece. So head on over to Wager Talk and check that out. But Ralph, as excited as we are about college basketball, college football still going on. Week 11 of the season now. Maction comes back tonight. We've got, 7 weeknight games here to consider. But we're going to head on over to the the late one on Friday, Washington and Oregon State. This is kind of an interesting game and an interesting line. We talk about teams getting a 7th loss and how they're probably good fade candidates from that point forward. Washington now, with 4 losses on the season, all of them in conference play, they're not going to get to the expectations that they had. I worry about them here as a double-digit favorite on Friday night against Oregon State, excuse me.
I'll tell you what, I have been a fan of this Oregon State team. 2 weeks ago, I called the upset against California. They were a 10.5-point dog. Last week, I called their upset against Arizona. You have Jake Luton, a 19-1 ratio. People don't realize how good he is. You have Pearson Jefferson running the ball, 1,100 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. You have Isaiah Hodgins, who is a solid wide receiver, and people talk about their defense. And yeah, they are allowing, 440 yards per game. And yes, they gave up 526 yards to Arizona, and they gave up 503 yards to Utah, and they gave up 492 yards to UCLA. But, it's a defense that does a lot of bend and don't break. The Arizona game, they had a big lead. They gave up those 38 points. And I do a college football stat compare sheet as well. That's free on my page at Wager Talk. And you look at Oregon State and Washington, they've played the 25 and 36 schedules respectively, very close. And yards per play, Washington is only plus 0.8 yards per play, and Oregon State's plus 0.2 yards per play. That's only a 0.6 yard per play difference. That certainly doesn't necessitate this big of a line for me. I am on the Beavers, and I am not jumping off the bandwagon. Again, on them UCLA, on them against Cal, on them against Arizona. I will say this, the road team is 8-0 in Beavers games, so I'm going against that trend, but I don't mind going against that trend.
Well, like I said, and this is important to keep in mind here too, is that, some teams getting to a bowl game means nothing. It's the level of the bowl game that you get to. And here for Washington, they could very well finish out the regular season at 8-4 with at Oregon State, at Colorado, and the Apple Cup game against Washington State. But that's not where they're supposed to be. The last 3 years, they played in the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, and the Peach Bowl, I think. They're not going to any of those this year. So, if you're Chris Peterson, maybe you start bringing in some of the underclassmen. Or maybe you start doing things a little bit differently. So that's also an element to keep in mind here at this time of the year.
Oh, absolutely. And, on the flip side, you look at an Oregon State team that right now is 4-4. Well, if you look at their last 4 seasons, they won 2 games, 4 games, 1 game, 2 games. They've won a total of 9 games in 4 years. Any bowl at all is going to be a program builder for the Beavers. And, we'll talk about this much more, but let's remember, good teams that get the bowls tend to continue to get the bowls because, number one, it gives them 15 extra practices. And if people don't think 15 extra practices are a big deal in December, they are totally wrong. That's why, I'm going to go back and just people may not remember this. Why did North Texas win that Sun Belt every year? because they kept going to a bowl. They kept getting the extra practices. They all got all of those extra, their young kids were ready to work, and they were much more prepared next year. That was when there were fewer bowls, and I'm dating myself back about a decade. But, that's the instance that jumps out to me. So Oregon State right now being at 4 wins, thinking, you know what, we have Washington at home. We're going to be in the Oregon State game. Washington State and Oregon, we got to get 2 of them. Best opportunity is this week at home. So you will have a concerted effort with probably, there's not many quarterbacks that have 19-1 ratios and people don't know their name. That's the case with Jack Lutton.
All right, so we go to LSU and Alabama here, and that's game 167, 168 on the board. I'm going to talk about this with all of our guests here on the show this week because it's the biggest game in college football in the regular season, and who knows, depending on how the playoff plays out, could be the biggest game in terms of the college football playoff and seeing how everything settles in for that. Alabama, 5.5 at some places, 6 at most places. What do you think about this weekend's huge matchup, Ralph?
Well, let's remember it is Alabama and it is at home. I just tweeted this out before the show, Adam. Going back to September 2015, Alabama's 31-0 straight up at home. Every game except one, they were a 15.5-point favorite. The one game they weren't a 15.5-point favorite or higher, they were an 8.5-point favorite against LSU, and they won and covered. So if you could say, I'm getting Nick Saban in Alabama at home laying under a touchdown, there's not a person in the world that's not going to say, well, that's damn good value. Now, it depends on, how good you think the LSU side is. I've been an LSU fan. I've been on their bandwagon. I didn't bet them. I've talked about it. I said at the beginning of the year, and I'm shooting myself in the foot, I said I would bet LSU to win the SEC if they were hosting Alabama and not having to go to Alabama. But because they go to Alabama, I didn't make that bet. So stupid me. Sometimes you just got to do it anyway, eat a 1-unit loss and move on. But I'm going to wimp out on this, Adam, and say, as far as the side goes, I'm going to watch as a fan, but I do lean with the over. And it's simply this. The Bama defense holding Tennessee to 231 didn't impress me. Holding Arkansas to 213 yards didn't impress me. This team has allowed 459 yards to South Carolina, 476 yards to Mississippi, almost 400 yards to A&M. We know they lost their leader in the middle linebacker, and the freshman's still there. This Alabama team is allowing over 300 yards, over 819 first downs. They're just not the same defense. I think we're going to see a higher scoring game, and I'm going to lean with the over.
One more game on the college football side I want to talk about, and this is one where I've got a power ratings overlay, and I'm tired of Brad Powers laughing at me about my power ratings overlays. So I figure I'll talk about this game with you where it's a little bit more of a safe space. Iowa and Wisconsin, game 193, 194. And in fact, this one now moving towards my number, so that makes me pretty happy. Wisconsin, a 9.5-point favorite here.
And what does your number say?
I got it 12.
Well, that's stupid, Adam. How can you have that big of an overlay on your power? No, I'm just kidding. This is a safe zone, you said. So we will keep it.
Let me correct myself. Then you really can laugh at me. I have it 13.5.
All right, I'm looking. You have a game number for me?
193, 194.
I have Wisconsin 7.5.
Okay, so we're 6 points off. All right, cool.
So I won't laugh, but there you have where my real number really is. Again, there was no team that lived off an easy schedule than Wisconsin did. And let's compare them to the New England Patriots. New England Patriots had historically one of the easiest schedules to start the year. What happened when they played a real opponent in Baltimore? We saw what happened. Wisconsin's beaten up. Wisconsin's been a good bully, but when someone punches them in the teeth, we've seen what happens. And I like this Iowa team. You look at their defense, held Michigan to a season low, held Purdue close to a season low, Northwestern 202 yards, allowing 3.1 yards per carry, allowing under 58% completions. The team knows how to go on the road and win and cover. The Iowa State game, they maybe shouldn't have won, but they did. The Michigan game they were in, lose 10-3 and cover, and then Northwestern. So, I'm done backing Wisconsin. I actually played against them in the Ohio State game, and I just think that they are the O-line that we thought was just going to be the normal Wisconsin O-line. I got bashed early because I was low on this Wisconsin team, and I said, listen, they lost 4 of their 5 returning starters on the O-line that had over 150 career starts. You just can't replace that. So what happens? They rush for, 300, 400, 500 yards per game. But we've seen what happened recently. Even against Illinois, 3.6 yards per carry. Against Northwestern, 3.6. While they're averaging 4.3 yards per carry in Big Ten play, it's just over 4 yards. So having that rush defense with them, I can't lay it with an offense that's averaging under 18 first downs in conference play. And the only reason they're averaging 35 points is that one the Michigan blowout where they scored 35 early. So I do lean with the dog here. And I've been happy with my power ratings numbers. And okay, I'll just throw it out there one more time. I don't mean to be a repeat person, but my power ratings are free at Wager Talk as well every Sunday morning. If people ever need an extra set, they get them updated. I have week by week all the changes sorted by alphabetical and by conference.
Well, there you go. Rolf telling you what's over at wagertalk.com. You can follow him on Twitter at CalSportsLV. And again, he's the Tuesday $2 handicapper. All 5 of his college basketball plays for tonight. $2 for the whole thing. So, Rolf, good luck with college basketball season, man. Good luck this week in college football. We'll talk to you again next week.
Adam, thank you very much. Appreciate it, bud.